Hello, Brother Monroe here. Welcome to another kind of one-off sort of video. This might end up becoming a two-parter, but this is a video that I've been thinking about doing for a while. And it is based on the stuff I did for the US Navy earlier this year. And it was prompted initially, way back last year, when the Strategic Defence Review 2025 came out, which was very, very woolly and didn't really include much in the way of spending commitments or new programs or anything like that. All that has been delayed for the Defence Investment Plan, which has been repeatedly delayed and delayed and delayed, probably because someone needs to make a decision about Ajax, and that is taking a while. However, I'm not talking about Ajax or the failures of the procurement there or the army. Today we're going to look at the Royal Navy because whilst I will look at when the Defence Investment Plan comes out, see if it matches up to this, I think it's worth looking at what the Royal Navy actually needs and what it wants based on Britain's strategic needs. And recent events have shown that something that people who've been watching the Royal Navy for a while have known for years and years and years, and that is the state of the Royal Navy is pretty bad at the moment. Possibly very bad. There is some good news in that new ships are on the way. The HMS Glasgow Type 26 is probably going to be ready this year to go into sea trials, and HMS Ventura probably either late this year or early next year will also go into trials, although she needs to have all of her extra stuff added back on, which is why the in-service date is slipped to 2030. Both of those ships, Glasgow and Ventura, could probably be hurried up if need be, if you get my drift. Anyway, so we're going to pull right back. We're going to look at, right, what does Britain need in terms of a navy? So the first thing is, well, what are our strategic goals? What have we set out that we want to do? First one is Britain wants to have a continuous at sea nuclear deterrent. That is a big commitment, and is a, that's going to drive a lot of our numbers for later. The second thing is that we want to have a carrier strike option. Okay. And third, although it's kind of fallen off a bit, really we want to be able to deploy Royal Marines anywhere we want, anytime we need to. An amphibious capability. So you've got three major capabilities that are above and beyond what you just need for a normal navy, and that has an impact down the line. So let's look at the first one. So a continuous at sea nuclear deterrent means you need submarines and nuclear submarines so that they can stay out on very long patrols, and this is already going on with the Dreadnought class, and we need 4 of those because the rough rule of thumb in warships and submarines and such things is 1 is none, 2 is 1, and I would also argue on 3 gives you anxiety. So you basically what it means is, if you have a critical capability of something, if you want to make sure you always have 1 ship or 1 boat of a certain type available, you need a minimum of 4 of them. If it's a capability that you want to have available most of the time, and it's a warship, you can get away with 3. But really, you need 4, which means 1 is in deep refit, 1 is kind of medium refit, another one is in reserve being used for training, and 1 is actively deployed. So that if the actively deployed one breaks, you can quickly swap the one that's ready but being used for training or on standby as the active one, and you don't lose the capability. So you'll see that a lot of these numbers are kind of divisible by 4 or 3, or very occasionally 2. If it's not a ship that is going to get a lot of wear and tear, you can get away with 2, but that is super, super risky. So we need 4 Dreadnought class. That's already underway, although they're being very slow and they drag their heels over replacement. They probably won't be ready soon enough. I think they should consider, and this is a nice to have, not a requirement, adding an extra 2 boats to the order and producing 6. This is because if you order 2 more boats, then you can spread out the wear and tear on the hulls between 6 boats instead of 4, which means they will last longer so that you have time to design and put into production the replacement for the Dreadnoughts. And I know it sounds weird thinking about replacements of ships that aren't even built yet, but that is kind of how you have to think about it. And you'll see this as a theme as I go through. But you have an extra 2, so if you've got 6, that means normally you're going to have 2 available. Sometimes you'll be down to the 1 fully available. Maybe you'd have 3 or even 4 available, but you should have minimum 1 and quite a lot of the time 2, which means you can have 1 as the continuous at sea nuclear deterrent, and the other can swap out the Tridents for land attack missiles, which is a pretty easy swap to do. You just swap out the tubes, and that gives us an SSGN, which allows the Dreadnought class to have conventional strike capability. That is super useful for selling to the public or the Treasury, because this is not, spending loads of money on something we never use. Well, actually, we could use it if we wanted to, because we've got the conventional strike option for them. Very handy. The other advantage, aside from spreading out the wear and tear across 6 rather than 4 boats, is if you have both an SSBN and an SSGN at sea at the same time, that gives you a bit of deception and concealment to your nuclear boat, the one with the tridents on it, because if an enemy was to detect your ballistic submarine, it doesn't know and has no way of telling whether it has the nuclear weapons on board or whether they've just found the conventional strike one. So potentially useful in that regard as well. Now, if you've got your 4 ballistic submarines, or ideally 6, although I'm willing to compromise on that, you need to keep them safe. And the best thing to keep them safe is regular submarines, not ballistic submarines. So this is currently the Astute class, and it will be their replacements, eventually the AUKUS class boats, however they end up looking. But how many of those do we want? Well, I would argue you need 16 submarines, SSNs. You could argue, for sake of money, that you could get away with 8 nuclear submarines and 8 diesel electric, or what's the hydrogen fuel cell powered ones, and split them 8 and 8. Although I think nuclear submarines are sufficiently more capable and more suited to Britain, and we don't have any experience running diesel or non-nuclear submarines. So I think it makes sense to just go for 16 nuclear submarines. I will compromise and go for 8 nuclear and 8 regular, if needs be. But you need 16, divide by 4. That means you have 4 submarines available at any one time, as opposed to the current 1, if we're lucky. And our current only operational submarine is in Australia. that is not good. So why 4? Well, you need 1 to keep an eye on the ballistic submarines. Ideally, you might want 2 submarines looking after our ballistic submarines. You need a 3rd, or possibly the 2nd and the 3rd, to go looking for enemy ballistic submarines, aka Russian ones, in the event of problems in the Arctic. So you want to have 1 available at least to go hunting. You need 1 available to defend. You need a 3rd that is able to go between those. So you've got, straight away, we should really have 3 submarines operating north of the UK. And then the 4th is available to do what the Astute class is doing at the moment, which is going and visiting allies, responding to various crises, and so on. So really, we want 4 active at any one time, and if you want 4 active at any one time, multiply by 4, you get 16. You could argue we maybe get away with 12, but I think that realistically 16 is a lot more viable, and that's a doubling of our current submarine fleet, which is significant. But that's, if you look at the requirements, that's actually how many we should have. So regular attack submarines, I'd say the Royal Navy is at half strength at best, because the Astute class availability is not very good. Right. There are other things that we need to talk about with the nuclear deterrent, but for now I'm going to table that, and we're going to look at our carrier capability. So currently the Royal Navy has 2 aircraft carriers that can operate Stovall aircraft, F-35B currently, although they don't have enough airframes. Separate problem. But let's just look at the requirements. So if we want to have a carrier available at any time, we don't have enough. And if you think I'm talking rubbish, well, look at the current situation, where, you know, we're not able to deploy a carrier to Cyprus right now. Both carriers, Queen Elizabeth and Prince of Wales, are in sufficiently long maintenance and refit periods that they're not usable. And you know, you could, of course, but it would take a month to get them up and worked up and ready, at least. And that means we don't have a carrier available whenever we need it. So we need more. We could go for 3, as we did with the Invincibles, but that doesn't guarantee that we always have 1 available. So I would argue we need 4. Now, 4 Queen Elizabeth classes, even with a defence budget increase, and I will talk money towards the end of the video, is probably not practical, nor is buying a 4 giant conventional carriers like the Charles de Gaulle or the American Ford class carriers. We could probably only ever field 1 of those, in the same way that the French only field 1 big carrier. If we want to have carrier abilities all the time, we need 4, and given the costs of carriers, we probably need to make them smaller, more like 40,000 ton ships, much closer to the Invincibles or the Italian Trieste class. They can still fly F-35Bs. You would still have probably a similar sized or slightly larger air wing with 4 of those. So if we aim to have 4 carriers, when we start thinking about replacing the Queen Elizabeths, well, the first 2 of these new carriers would be in addition to the Queen Elizabeths, and then the second 2 would replace them. So you would temporarily have slightly more capacity, but then it would go back down. And airframes, you probably need to order about 120 F-35Bs to make sure that you always had fresh airframes for all of those. But I don't think they'll ever go that high, but that's what ideally, if the government was serious about having carriers as an actual capability rather than an appendage swing exercise, that is what you would need to do. And that is probably eye-wateringly expensive, but if you want to have carriers, then they are expensive. They are the kind of premier naval force. If you have them, you are a top-tier navy. If you don't, then you're not. Given, I think most, France has the one. They could afford 4 smaller ones. Italy has one, has a few. The UK having 4 would guarantee we always have one available. And it means if we think of wider European defence, it also means that Britain can just say, look, we've got carriers covered. So other European countries, if they have carriers, those are just extra. They're not part of the kind of loose framework between Europe that between us we should have one available if we need it, which currently is Charles de Gaulle. So we need, I would argue, 4 light carriers. Okay, you've got 4 light carriers. One is always available. So now we have a carrier to look after, which is going to impact our escorts. Now, the next thing that we kind of want is amphibious ability. I would argue the Royal Marines are under strength. They only have 2 battalions currently. Really, we should be aiming to have 3 so that we have a full-sized amphibious brigade. So 4-2, 4-5, and reactivate one of the other commando units as a full battalion. And they need something to carry them around. And Britain's already working on this. It's been a requirement for a while. They haven't quite decided on exactly what design they're going with. But this is the multi-role strike ship, which is a combined landing platform dock, landing platform helicopter, landing support dock, and with a bit of light defensive stuff thrown on. So it's got its own small ELS battery and some seaways and things, just to make sure that if an errant missile heads its way, it's not a sitting duck, or just something simple like a bomber with regular bombs coming in at low level. Okay, the ship can defend itself. If you're wondering why is there that requirement there, then if you go look at the Falklands War, near the end, at Bluff Cove, this was a very unfortunate problem, is that they had 2 landing ships unescorted because they thought there was no more air threat, and bombs hit it, and a lot of people lost their lives in that attack. So the Royal Navy, understandably, wants some protection on their landing ships. Now, these are a really cool idea. I think you could, if you're planning on having 3 battalions, so a full brigade, amphibious ships don't suffer the same wear and tear as warships. They tend to have longer lives. I mean, look at Argus, which has only just been retired. You could get away with having as few as 6 of these, on the assumption that half of them will be available at any one time. So if you can fit an entire battalion on one of these things, if you've got 6 of these ships, only 3 of them need to be available. The other 3 can be in maintenance and refit, and you swap between the 2. That would give the Royal Navy the ability to deploy a brigade of Royal Marines anywhere in the world at any time. And that's a very, very powerful ability. That is not a unique ability, but it would be a very unusual ability to have within the framework of NATO or Europe, and something that the British can, when you're talking diplomacy and defence agreements and stuff, say, hey, look, we have this capability that you do not. let's work together. We're bringing this to the table. It's a powerful, soft power tool, as well as an actual ability that is pretty darn useful. If a Falklands-style conflict happened to occur, hostile beach landings and stuff like that are pretty rare, but if you don't have the ships to do them, then they're impossible. Okay, so we've got our main capabilities sorted out. We've got our continuous at sea nuclear deterrent, we have a carrier, and we have an amphibious group. All of that needs escorts. So we have, in terms of escorts, we have to think destroyers, air defense units. Now, if you've seen the Everything Old is New Again video, where I talk about how you can apply Napoleonic rating systems to ships, this will not come as a surprise, but yeah, essentially what you need are your ships of the line to keep these things safe. That means destroyers with somewhere between 64 to 80 VLS cells, full-size VLS cells for interceptor missiles and various whatever other missiles you want to put in them. But you need, you know, the main VLS battery needs to add up to around about that. I'd say 72 is kind of the magic kind of point between, you know, if you go over that, I think you're getting into too big. You're starting to encroach on cruisers, and in smaller, it's a bit weak sauce. This is where the Type 45s sit. Now, when the Type 45s were being developed, the Royal Navy said we need 12, and they only got 6. And that is why, currently, when the Foreign Office and the Prime Minister go, we need to send a ship to go do things, the Royal Navy has to turn around and go, well, we don't have any. We only have one actually operational, and that's busy doing something that we can't tell it not to do. We have 2 in sort of, you know, light refit and maintenance periods. This would be HMS Dragon. So I think it's Duncan, Dragon, and I think Dauntless is the other one that's soon to be available. But that one's coming right out of a massive upgrade program. So really there are only 2. One, Duncan, is busy, and Dragon was in the middle of a refit period in dry dock. So like, well, we need to send it. Oh, okay, that'll take us a week and a half. A bit more now, because we found that there was a problem, and we needed some welders to go and fix it. Oh dear. Yeah, 6 is not enough, because if you take 6, you divide by 4, you get 1. And sometimes 2. That's not enough, especially for what we're talking about here. So, how many do we need? Well, we need 1 to look after the carrier. That's not great. Ideally, you'd have 2, but we definitely need 1 to look after the carrier. We need 1 available to look after our amphibious strike group. So that's 2. We probably need 1 available to do all the things that the destroyer in peacetime has to do anyway, like standing NATO maritime group commitments, stuff like that. So bare minimum we need 3, and ideally we would have a 4th to respond to, well, crises, or act as a training ship when, you know, the one in kind of standby. As we had with the submarines, you've got 1 that is ready to go right now, that is training up crew, and sitting around in Britain waiting to see if there's something that needs doing. Of course, while it's in Britain, it can also act as a ballistic missile defence platform for the UK, to keep us safe from problems. So that's 4. In an ideal world, you need 4 destroyers. And if you want to have 4 destroyers available at any one time, you need to build 16 of them. This would be the Type 83 that is currently in development. glad to see that they are thinking about it, but 6 will not cut it. That is just going straight back to the problem that we have with the Type 45s. Well, one of the problems we have with the Type 45s, in that we only have 6. We need 16. Now, I can just imagine the face of the Treasury when the Royal Navy comes along and says we need 16 of these things, and we will not settle for less. Oh, my. But, as I said, we'll get to the money later. So, ideally, we want 16 destroyers. We only have 6. So, we're 10 off the pace. Oof. And I forgot to say, how many amphibious ships do we have available at the moment? Like, none. So, yeah, this isn't the worst. The worst part by any means. So, we've now got our air defense sorted. Now we need to look at the other type of escorts. So, remember, our carrier only has a single destroyer looking after it. It must have some ASW looking after it. So, we definitely need an ASW frigate. And fortunately, with the Type 26 program, we will soon have some ASW frigates. That's great. So how many ASW frigates do we need? Well, we need 1 to look after the carrier. We need 1 to look after the continuous at sea nuclear deterrent. So that's 2. And we need a 3rd to look after the amphibious strike group. And we need a 4th to, well, act as our response ship, or actually, you know, go out and look for enemy submarines, because we haven't covered that capability yet. So we need at minimum 4, I would say, which means we need 12 ASW frigates. Currently, the order for the Type 26 is only 8. We are building 5 for Norway, which is great. So you could argue that the Norwegian ones are covering, you know, some of the capabilities that the Royal Navy would be using the Type 26 that they are getting for. But, you know, working with allies is great. But, you know, the Norwegians are going to focus on one particular mission, and the UK has global naval requirements, and has for like the last 400 or 500 years. So that's nothing new. So really, I would argue we need 4 ASW frigates minimum, which means we need 12 to be built. So the 8 that are currently under construction, I would strongly urge them to build another 4 in addition to the Norwegian ones. Or if the Norwegians reduce their order, build them anyway and take them into UK service. Now, that does have possible knock-on effects to our destroyer program, but I'll get to that later. So we need 12 ASW frigates. We also need frigates to do all sorts of other things, such as keep an eye on Russian ships going through the channel, responding to various crises, if we need to send, if you know, a frigate is more appropriate, force presence missions, things like that, and training. And then, oh look, we need a general purpose frigate to handle those. Unfortunately, we're building one, the Type 31. I can't remember what the exact order of the Type 31 is off the top of my head. I think it's quite low, it's like 6 or something. Really, we need 12 of those as well. For a full force of 24 frigates. Half of them ASW specialists, half of them general purpose. And that doesn't have to, the general purpose ones don't have to be Type 31s. They could be a Type 31 Batch 2, or a Type 32, or whatever, but yeah, I would argue we would need 24 of those, which means that at any one time we have 8 frigates available. 4 of them ASW, 4 of them general purpose, which means our carrier group would have the carrier, a destroyer, an ASW frigate, and 1 or 2 regular frigates. That's a pretty lean carrier group when you think about it like that. And this is the problem with naval planning. It's You know, you want a thing, you need to buy multiples of that thing, or that thing might as well not be there. It's very irritating. Now, that's not everything. We also have, or the Royal Navy likes to have various ships on permanent stations, so we often want to have a ship over in the Middle East for obvious reasons. Until recently that was HMS Lancaster, until she basically broke. Currently it's a few river class, same down in the Falklands, it's usually a river class. Ideally we would have something in Gibraltar. Again, that would ideally be a river class or something like that. So we do have a need, I would argue, for probably 4 OPVs or something like it, which means 12. They tend to have slightly better availability, which is good, but the problem with the rivers is the batch ones are old, and because they're old, they really need to be replaced quite soon. So I seem to remember that we have 4 of those type of the batch ones. Yes, we do. 4 batch ones and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 batch 2s for a total of 9. I would argue we need 12. They do have generally better availability. If we go for they have good availability, i.e. we can divide by 2, that means we would have 6 patrol craft available at any one time. What you build is interesting. So the river class, if you're unaware of them, they're not great. I would argue that the lack of a helicopter hangar, they do have a deck, but they don't have a hangar to keep them in, it was a big oversight. So I think when we're looking to replace the batch 1s, the minimum requirement is a helicopter hangar, which doesn't have to have a helicopter in it. Of course, it can have drones or something, but something that could take a helicopter and a multi-purpose gun, something like a 40mm Bofors, like they've got on the Type 31s, or a 57 or a 76mm modern multi-purpose airburst, fancy airburst, programmable ammunition, all that sort of stuff. That's kind of your minimum. There is another option with the OPVs. You could go down the route that the European powers are going down, which is building something more like a corvette. So that is, again, imagine a river class, but you stick some naval strike missiles on it, you upgrade the gun, as you were doing anyway, you give it the full helicopter deck, but you also add a small VLS battery of like 16 cells, which you then quad pack with CAM, Sea Venom, Sea Scepter. Sea Venom's the helicopter launched one. So Sea Scepters. So quad pack 16 cell Sea Scepter, something like that, and that means that your river class replacement, your OPV, is now a corvette. Corvette, very, very handy because it can defend itself. If they are significantly harder to destroy than a river class, which makes them a bit more of a deterrent, which is the primary job of this type of ship. And in the event of a conventional conflict, they are not entirely useless, and they can feed into the fancy system of systems, blah blah blah, talking buzzwords, stuff that the Navy loves to talk about, because they have the option to defend against missiles, they have the option to strike enemy craft, they have a helicopter, that they are a useful part of your overall force if needed, but most of the time they will be doing your kind of frontline peacekeeping, flying the flag stuff. And I would argue, 12 with good availability means we would have 6. 12 with full-on warship availability means that you would have 3 available at any one time. 1 in the Falklands, 1 in the Middle East, and 1 either back in Britain or in Gibraltar. And you wouldn't, because we've got significantly more frigates, they wouldn't be tasked with doing things like escorting ships through the channel, which looks mildly farcical when they're escorting like a huge Russian frigate or destroyer or something, and it's just, oh, what have we got to fight against it? Well, we've got a 30mm, or I think it's 20mm on the batch ones, and that's it. Ram them. That's where we are. Now, I've only spoken about crewed systems here. The Royal Navy is a big fan of uncrewed systems. There's all this talk of a hybrid navy. I would say that none of the roles that I've outlined so far can be done by unmanned systems. So our unmanned systems are an addition to this. And I if you've watched the US video, you know I'm a fan of the companion sloop idea, which would be the Type 91 program. So you have a ship which has an optional, very small crew of about 12, some VLS cells, I don't know, 24 to 36 of them perhaps, maybe less, that can be remote controlled from a crewed ship. So the optional crew that's normally on this sloop can be on the big destroyer or the frigate, controlling it remotely, and that gives you VLS mats, extra VLS cells that you don't mind firing off, because it's much easier to just send the sloop back home to reload at a dock. You don't have to worry about, well, we've depleted the magazine of a frigate or a destroyer, and now we need to try and replenish at sea, which reloading VLS at sea is very, very difficult. Most of the time they have to go back to port anyway. So now we can just send the sloop off, and then, oh well, another sloop has come out and taken up its place. So you can maintain your magazine depth very, very well. If they were going for that, you'd probably need about 40 of those to make sure that the frigates and destroyers had access to, because you can have multiple of these things operating with one ship. So if a destroyer escorting the carrier has 4 of these sloops, you can kind of see where the number 40 comes from, because let's say they're high availability divided by 2, that means there are 20 available. If each ship is taking 4 of those, that means you could have 4 ships with a full complement, and another one with a half complement. The numbers come down quite quickly. And the other uncrewed system, of course, are the uncrewed submarines, which are basically like big floating sonar buoys for the Atlantic Bastion stuff. Great idea, but again, they're not a replacement for an actual submarine, mainly because they don't carry any weapons, but they are very, very handy. I would definitely go ahead with those, because that gives you a wide sonar net, and you can use your submarines more effectively with it. Great. Now, it's all very well playing fantasy fleets with the fun stuff. You need to keep all these things going, and that means we need to look at the Royal Fleet Auxiliary. We've got all these ships. I think conservatively you would probably need 8 tankers. So for the RFA, you can assume that kind of half of them will be available at any one time. Maybe a bit more, actually, if the RFA, because these are built more to commercial standards rather than military standards, so you could have much higher availability. But let's assume half, because plan for the worst, hope for the best is a good motto to live by. So we want 8 tankers. That means we would always have 4 available one with the carrier, one with the amphibious group, one that can go out and refuel, and then two that can kind of go out and refuel whatever we need to refuel, such as an ally who is close by or something like that. We need solid support ships. I would argue that we would need probably 6, which means we would always have 3 available, one going out to the carrier, one going to the amphibious group, and one that is a spare to deal with the various frigates and destroyers that we have dotted all over the place. You then need something... I think you could probably combine all of these functions into one ship, but you need repair, aviation support, so workshops to repair airframes and stuff like that, that the carrier can't handle, submarine tenders, ship, kind of a general kind of workshopy type vessel. You probably only need 4 of those, meaning that you would have 2 available, one with the carrier and one with the amphibious strike group, or redeploying over to a ship that needed it. And then, of course, if we've got a brigade of Royal Marines floating about, we need to have the ability to move army support elements to help them. So you need some roll-on, roll-off heavy transports, probably about 6. So there are 3 available. So the Marines can land in brigade strength, and then you have 3 big heavy transports delivering tanks and trucks and all this sort of thing that's too heavy to put in a regular landing ship as well. That's a pretty sizable upgrade for the RFA, who've been horribly hollowed out of late. These ships, though, they're commercially built, so they're probably the easiest ones to actually build. And that's where we turn to money and such things. But before that, I would say that the RAF has a very important role in supporting the Royal Navy, and there are some very important capabilities that the Royal Navy really needs the RAF for. One is airborne early warning. So, yes, we do have the Merlin Watchkeeper, or whatever it's called, on the carrier, but a land-based airborne early warning, which is the E7 Wedgetail. I would argue we would need 9 of those, not the 4 or whatever it is that we're currently buying. So we need, I would say, at least 9 of those. I'd say we would need at least 12 P8 or similar maritime patrol aircraft. I think currently we have 6, so I'm talking about doubling the fleet there. And we would need 6 recon birds, like a rivet joint, I would argue. And again, I don't think the RAF has 6. I think we have 2 or 3. So, yeah, more of those big land-based planes that can really help support and be force enablers for the Royal Navy. If you've played Sea Power and you've got a Nimrod R1 flying around, they are incredibly useful. And yeah, again, if you play Sea Power, you've got a P3 Orion. How much of a useful asset that is when you're doing naval assets. It's super important that those are available. But yes, we need to talk money and also the strategy here. So currently the UK has 2 military yards operating. We have the Clyde, which is building the Type 26, and is planned to start building the Type 83 destroyers. And we have Rosyth, which is building the Type 31. I would argue that you continue building Type 26s on the Clyde, and you build 12. You ring up the BAE and you tell them to continue with the expansion. They are currently expanding the yard. They're building a second assembly hall. But you say, look, we want to accelerate the Type 26 program as much as we can. I know you're already doing it, but you have shipbuilding contracts out to 2050, basically. We want 12 Type 26, and we want 16 Type 83s. That'll keep you going for a very long time. So expand your yard, expand your workforce, as you have been, but keep more. We want you to be producing more, and I'll come back to how you do the production. Recyth can then be in charge of building out the general purpose frigates, the Type 31s, or Type 31-2, or Type 32, or whatever it happens to be. And we're hoping to get them up to building one warship a year. They might be able to do the corvettes or the river class replacements as well. But again, that's a lot. You know, you've got orders out to 2050. Get on with it. Hire people. Build out your capacity, please. Burrow in Furnace is where all the nuclear subs are built. This is probably the biggest choke point for my plan. And it's basically like, look, we've given you Dreadnought, and we want you to build 16 AUKUS boats, and we want you to build all the reactors for the Australian AUKUS boats. You have a lot of stuff to do. Can you get it to one submarine a year? Please, one submarine a year. And for the other ships, so you've got the amphibious ships. I think the solid support ships are being built at Harland and Wolff in Belfast. You could again go to Harland and Wolff, and you could go, right, you're going to be our kind of second, not full combatant, but you know, the kind of support ships. So you're going to be building out the amphibious stuff for us. We want you to do the Elite Strike. Maybe that isn't quite going to work, but basically you need a yard dedicated to building all of the amphibious and all of the support stuff. You could build a lot of the RFA stuff in more commercial yards. Ferguson Marine is one that pops to mind, but you know, you can spread those around quite easily. But I think the key thing is to get not production lines, because those aren't a thing for ships, but if you have a yard that is, say, Recycle, that is continually producing escorts, frigates, corvettes, whatever. You have a yard continually producing destroyers, say the Clyde yard. You have a yard continually producing submarines. Although I would argue that you probably want to split it and have 2 yards building submarines, but never mind. One for the attack and one for the big boomer ones, or bombers. And you want one producing the big, complicated ships, like the amphibious ships and the carriers, and you just keep a steady. We want you to produce a frigate, or whatever, every year, or every 18 months, or every 2 years, or whatever it is. Not forever, obviously, because things change, but more or less. Like we will always buy a frigate, because that gives because the yards are private. You could argue you should nationalise them, but at the moment they're private. It gives them absolute certainty in future income, and that is big for a business. That means that they can think long term. They can invest in expanding their yards, improving efficiency, getting costs down, getting times down, sorting out supply chain issues. They can focus on all of that, because what the UK has done for the last 30, 40 years is stop-start procurement. We need 6 destroyers, and then we don't want anything from you. So the yard works up, builds 6 destroyers, and then it's just shut down, and all the people leave because they don't have a job, they don't have anything to work on. So you have to keep up a constant drip of ships coming into the Navy, and you try and build the Navy back up to the force levels that I've been talking about over probably decades. It'll probably take you till 2050 to get to these kind of numbers, but that is what I would argue the Royal Navy needs. And I can already hear the comments saying, you need people for all this. Sure, we need more people. We need welders, we need engineers, and we need sailors. And why don't we have enough of them currently? Well, the RFA aren't paid very well. Is why the RFA is having trouble. Because if you're in the RFA and then, you're, say, an engineer in the RFA, someone comes along from a commercial shipping line, like Maersk or something, and goes, and we'll pay you double to do the exact same job in probably better conditions. Who's going to say no to that? So you have to pay sailors, you have to pay the RFA well, so increase in pay, of course that means more money. Whoever thought that privatising recruitment centres for the defence of the realm was a good idea probably needs to be fired. Out of a cannon into the sun, future R reference for you. Yeah, the recruitment across the armed forces needs to be looked at. It should not take months. One of the things that's a big problem at the moment is someone will go to a recruitment centre, say, hey, I want to join the Navy. 18-year-old, just fresh out of school, I'll join the Navy. I don't know what else to do, or the Army, or the RAF, or whatever. But cool, I'll learn skills. They've seen the cool adverts. They're like, oh yeah, great. And then it takes months to get them through medical, and then offer them a place. And by that point, they've found a job, because you can't sit around without a job for months. They found another job. They've maybe got a partner or something. They're starting to settle into their adult life, and they don't want to anymore. And you could ask, what's going on in MOD recruitment? The problem is time. You want the person to come in, go, I want a job with the Navy or the RAF or Army or whatever. Cool, great, love to have you. We'll get your medical assessment done this week, and then we'll ship you off to training, if that's all okay. Great, off you go, in you come, get them in quickly. And they might decide it's not for them and drop out, that happens, but you can't have months-long delays between someone making that decision and actually actioning it, because they'll move on to something. And of course you need retention, which is pay, conditions, and having work to do. Like if you're a shipbuilder and you don't have a ship to build, well, you're going to go and look for something else. And the other thing that the UK can really do is education, apprenticeships. I know, this is already a thing that the shipbuilders are doing. But with government help, you can have apprenticeships, funded apprenticeships. You can have education courses, funded education courses in college or university. University is expensive, especially in England. Oh, hey. Do you want to do an engineering degree? And we'll pay for it, provided you join the Navy as an engineer afterwards, which is already a scheme, by the way. But, expand that, really hype it up. Go to students who are already there studying and go, hey, we'll pay your tuition fees for you if you sign on to join the armed forces when you leave. There's all sorts of things that could be done and just aren't. And they're not hard things to do. So I think recruitment is not something... I'm not talking about a Navy that needs 1 million people in it. We're talking about a Navy with 50,000 personnel and, a few dozen thousand in the supply chain and the workforce. And investing in this sort of thing, investing in people, investing in industrial capacity, really kind of pays itself off in the long run, so shouldn't be too much of a hard sell for the Treasury. Speaking of the Treasury, they are the main obstacle to the Royal Navy and have been for the last 600 years, because they hate spending money, the penny pinching bastards. How much money are we talking? So, I would say, with a bit of wiggle room, you immediately turn around and whack an extra 10 billion a year into the Navy's budget. That is mainly for maintenance, but it's also for increased pay for the RFA, reforming the working conditions and investment into the yards. But you go, no, 10 billion a year, not a one-off, 10 billion a year, just flat out, I want that going into extra maintenance for the Royal Navy. And that will eventually turn into the extra maintenance costs for all these new ships that we're building. And obviously this would have to be inflation adjusted as inflation happens. But in 2026 money, 10 billion extra a year, straight off, just for the extra maintenance, extra crew, getting ships fixed, the ships that we do have fixed up faster and more effectively. Get on it. That's the short term, and then longer term supporting the enlarged navy. Then I would immediately go, right, here is 10 billion a year for construction of ships. Get going, and that right now we go into yard expansion and things like that, but also securing contracts. But longer term, that is just going to stay there. So every year, 10 billion, we want more ships. More ships, we want that that steady drip of ships coming in. Just a steady drip, 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 drip. More and more and more ships. And then, well, we're a bit behind. That is not going to be enough to increase the force. That's enough to keep the construction going, but it's not enough to kickstart a regeneration of the Navy. And for that, I would earmark another 10 billion as extra money to be like, right, no, really, expand your yard, long lead items, contracts, secure all of that. Here is another 10 billion. So I would, in the Defence Investment Plan, which is due to be published soon, say there is an extra 30 billion a year for the Royal Navy alone, and I would taper off that last 10 billion after 10 years, so an extra 20 billion just constantly, and an extra 30 for 10 years, and obviously you have to inflation adjust and increase it all, blah 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 blah, economic stuff. And that sounds like a lot of money, and it is, because the Royal Navy has been ignored and underfunded for, well, since the 1990s, basically, since the Cold War ended, because there has been this assumption that we don't really need enough conventional armed forces, conventional conflict isn't going to happen, if there's a nuclear war, well, conventional forces don't matter either, so yeah, who cares? We don't need it. There won't be any war in the future. Yeah, how's that working out in the 2020s? Not great. So, yeah, that's what I think they need to do. So if you have made it to this far in the video, well done. Record it all in a single take, by the way, as well. If you happen to be in government or have any influence whatsoever in this, think about it, because this is what the Royal Navy actually needs. This is not crazy, over-the-top, rule Britannia, conquer the waves stuff. This is kind of minimum to meet the requirements set out in the Strategic Defence Review, although I did push the amphibious capability a bit, I will admit. This is actually what you said you needed. And if you're not prepared to fund it, then you have to dial back what you're saying to the public the Navy is expected to do. Because at the moment, the Royal Navy is barely able to do anything, which is, For students of history, feel free to look back through Britain's history and what happens when they stop building ships. So, early 1700s. That didn't end well. Between the First and Second World Wars, didn't end particularly well, although they did restart it in the 30s, of course. John Knott, who I've complained about on the channel before, when in 1981 was like, we don't need a navy. How did that go? Britain, as an island nation, needs a navy, and it costs money. But I do think that those costings, the government has said, we're going to increase defence spending. we're going to increase defence spending to 3, maybe 3.5% of GDP. There's this push now to go for 5% of GDP. And I think this Navy expansion plan is affordable, bearing in mind that we are also including beefing up the Marines and beefing up the RAF. Is affordable on 3 at a pinch, 3.5. I think it's a bit more comfortable defence budget. But that basically all of the increases going into the Navy. If we're going to 5%, this is very, very doable, I would argue, and would also allow the Army and the RAF to expand, not just to regenerate capabilities or get new equipment, but actually expand their capabilities. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments. When the defence investment plan actually comes out, hilarious that it shares an acronym with the mod I make, I will have a look at it and I will give it a read. But goodness me, does the Royal Navy need some more ships and urgently. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again soon for some more ranting about nonsense. Bye for now.